Hi, and welcome to the Adjacent podcast. Originating at NYU's Interactive Telecommunications Program, the Adjacent Journal has been a platform for creatives to explore the intersection between media and technology. Now, the Adjacent podcast has been created as an extension of this idea. We're looking into opening and further exploring the dialogue surrounding creative technology while showcasing the minds and works of ITP students, staff, and alumni. In this episode of the Adjacent podcast, ITP.REMOTE, we're going to go in depth with some select members of the ITP community in their response to COVID-19 and the ways in which they've been made to adjust their habits and schedules due to the current quarantine. So we're your hosts. I'm Ashley Jane Lewis.
Hey, and I'm Tundi Sauce.
So I'm an Afrofuturistic new media artist and a tech educator.
And I am a design director. I work in a lot of emerging media, especially in the wellness space.
And we've got a big team behind this production, so we just wanted to give a couple quick thank yous and shout outs. So special thanks to Nancy Hechinger, our producers Razik Brown and Shivani Prasad, and Kwan Wen Chen, who's on graphics. We couldn't do it without this great team, so really excited about that.
Next, we're going to talk to a very special guest, somebody who's near and dear to the ITP heart and community. Tundi, did you want to introduce our guest?
Yes, so everybody, I'd love to introduce Nancy Hechinger. And Nancy, if you are live, we would love to, yes, we would love to say hello and welcome you to the first episode of Adjacent. And we would love to have, you kick us off as we start this series and perhaps give us some ideas of your intentions moving forward.
The thing about Adjacent was, it came out of, we have this wonderful spring and winter show, which really, privileges physical computing. And a lot of the work that our students do, is either physical computing or screen-based. And what sometimes is missed, even when people do their thesis, is how much serious thinking and research there is. And there isn't really a place for emerging media. There's probably, something for if you're into VR, if you're into whatever, different things. But the thing about ITP is that our students do a whole bunch of different things. Some of them write very well, and some of them have something to say other than just show the thing that they made. That there's a lot of thought and research behind it. So I decided I thought it would be a good idea to have a journal. And actually, it came up too with an alumni from a few years ago, Justin Peake, who thought it was a good idea because there's a concept called the adjacent possible. And the thing about the adjacent possible is it's the idea that actually really creative things happen when people bump up against another idea. So like a lot of big ideas come in cities because there's all these different kinds of people. And it comes from a term in biology that when one thing is alike, one thing is like this and one thing is like this, when they bump together, they can make something special. So we were thinking about that the adjacencies, that's what, really is the creative energy in a way of ITP, that people have come from art or architecture, media technology. Ashley was teaching before as well as being a media artist. People have come from advertising. We've had acrobats. We've had all sorts of crazy people. But something that comes out is a very rich brew. So I thought it'd be nice to have a place like that. And I wrote a faculty grant to see if we could get some startup money for it. And we did. We got it. And with a very small team, we put out the first issue. David Lockhart and Stephanie Colton and Laura Weinman-Carey and Lindsay Piscatel, and then and Sehod. I don't know how many of you remember Sehod did a lot of the graphic design. And then all of a sudden, we had to do a back end and blah, 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 blah. But anyway, whatever it is, it worked. And so we're about to publish our 7th issue. And what's really exciting is that we're publishing work of ITP students, as well as ITP alumni. This next issue, we have somebody from MCC, an undergrad, who done a great piece, and we've had submissions outside of our network. Yeah.
I think it's amazing that there's been 7 issues and now also a podcast.
Yeah.
what has changed? What have you noticed change or evolve over the issues as the publications have sort of aged and matured?
I mean, the first one, nobody knew what adjacent was, and it was sort of scrounging like, well, maybe we could get so-and-so to write, and so-and-so, I'm pulling, hey, Mickey, hey, Judy, let's have a journal. It was a really nice first issue, but it just was kind of getting people to write who had no idea what we were doing. And the reason they had no idea what we were doing is because we had no idea what we were doing. And then in the second issue, we knew a little bit more. And then starting with the third issue, I think it was the third issue, we said, well, let's try a theme, because we were getting a lot of submissions that seemed to be about bodies and text. So we did a really nice issue on that. And so now we're sort of into the theme thing, because again, when we sent a submission out, it lets people know what they should do. What's changed is we're much bigger. We realize, oh, we need actually back-end designers, and we need front-end designers, and we need somebody in charge of the images. But we've had wonderful illustrations by, ITP students. It's exciting. It's fun for me to work with students in this way. The thing about the podcast is that it takes a lot to edit a journal. I mean, we go through several drafts back and forth. But we were thinking that just a way of extending our reach is, wouldn't it be cool to do a podcast? And so Razik actually said, hey, I'd be into doing the podcast. And so that's how it starts. And I think what we tend to do is very ITP. Let's throw a lot of balls in the air and see how many we catch.
I'd love to, talk a little bit about contextually us launching this podcast and this series at a time in the world that is very unique, in a time when coronavirus has us all quarantined at home. Yeah. I'd love to get your thoughts around what you might think Red Burns, how she would respond to this effort, and how she, what you think her energy can bring to the table with Adjacent as a whole.
I think I said in the first introduction that this whole enterprise is dedicated to Rev. She was one of my great mentors, obviously a colleague and a really, very good friend. She loved anything that showed off ITP students. She would just love that, that it was another way of showing the great stuff that we do and the great thinking that goes on. She was a fantastic reader. She was pretty much self-taught. She never went to college, but she was the best read person I've ever met. I think she'd be pleased with the way, the way we've grown. Now she died, we didn't have a IMA. Now we have an undergraduate program, we're grad below res, we have Adjacent, we have, just so many things going on. The ITP students have been remarkable, especially the ones graduating like you, graduating this year. I mean, it's silly to say, well, wait, we're cheated out of commencement or graduation, but you were cheated out of, just the camaraderie of the end of the year. We have this thing that the faculty does sometimes when something great happens. We just go, oh, here's an I love ITP moment. But there's been an love ITP semester just because the students have really been great. And really, instead of just saying like, I don't care, I'm not going to do it. You should do this, you should do that. It's not fair. People just really, I do that. Everybody does that a little bit. But they really have settled down with such a glad heart and good effort. There's not one person who said, this is too much for me, I can't do it, and I'm just going to hand in whatever, which would be okay. I would accept that. But everybody just really wants to do their best.
I think the community that makes up ITP are full of people who have really found ways to put together innovative careers. And so I think that it's like really it's been interesting to watch how our classmates have gone about trying to like make it work. And we're going to interview a lot of those people today, or at least like a good handful of those people. But it is definitely worth saying that there is something about the floor and the space, and like, if anything, conversations I've had in passing through other group meetings have sort of like been able to like sit and nostalgically think about the community that we have, that's not gone, but certainly physically on pause and definitely changed. But yeah, it goes to say that the community does not exist the same way online. Like, it's certainly different. And I think that's more to the point that there's something about the ecosystem that is curated and specifically energized. It's really interesting to watch people on the internet gather for like new methods of social interaction. And a lot of these people are individuals who had never met before but share common needs now that we're in this particular circumstance. And I think that's really interesting to note that the way we've moved forward at ITP is largely based on having been very close before, but the internet is like full, like Club Quarantine, Cloud9, all of these individuals banding together to mail in handmade masks to medical facilities. It's really cool to see how people have like made community from strangers, as well as sustained community of like close networks.
Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you joining us, Nancy, and of course your insight around how our response is also just positive, I guess, to say like, it's nice to hear that you think we're reacting well, because I think individually we're all in our own worlds, like in various levels of okay. So it's nice to hear that from your perspective, it feels like we're handling this well.
Yeah, much better sometimes than I am. So I think like, yeah, I think I'm really proud of everybody. I really am.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks for kicking off our podcast.
Okay, well, I'll be listening and inviting people to speak to thesis at the same time.
Amazing. Thanks, Nancy.
Okay, thanks, Ashley. Thanks, Tundi.
Erron is a sound artist and musician studying at ITP. He had the unique situation of having to pivot rather rapidly during his last and most recent performance. On March 13th, Erron was meant to perform live to an audience of people at ReFest, which is a festival that Culture Hub was hosting in the city of New York. Many incredible people in that lineup, and pretty much the day that quarantine began was unfortunately the same day that Erron had to perform. And so we are really excited to talk to you about the experience of very rapidly having to design or take a design for an in-person performance and put it onto the internet. I think this was one of the first cases that I've heard. I know there's been so many performance artists who have had to do this since then. But I'm really excited to talk about the performance you had in mind and what ended up happening at ReFest.
For my side, it wasn't that much of a buffer to rethink the performance. I mean, around that time, we also had midterms, I think, on thesis, and it was mostly props to ReFest and Culture Hub on how to stream, and I think they were really prepared to do that. But still was a huge uncanny feeling of arriving to a place that is supposed to host 100 people, 200 people, and then seeing it empty, and then seeing just us trying to deliver the same amount of energy. I don't know if Wenjing is here, but she also had her performance the day before. She could come in, but it was just this bittersweet feeling of, okay, it's awesome that it's happening, and they just had the luck to. The event started 2 days before the actual quarantine was called. So just by sheer luck of 2 days, they were able to not cancel it, but still, bittersweet. That's the biggest word that comes to mind when talking about that day. I also remember the feeling of still distance, even when the people that, I mean, by now, I don't know about you too, but you get used to be outside and just keep your distance, and it's natural. But at that moment, everyone was just getting used to that. So arriving to a place that is supposed to have this energy of moving forward, of charm, of art. When you are in a festival, you want to hug everyone and you want to say how are you and what can I help you with. But then having this on the back of your head, like, I have to still be away from you, and it created this contradiction in that day. But they have been doing an amazing job on embracing that, because that day was just like, let's try to make this happen online, and that's it. But I think they're Jason is making something together with them. so yeah, at least on my side, I just tried to make my performance happen, and they were super helpful in just streaming it in the highest quality. But I didn't had enough time to make it more interactive, or it just happened the way it was meant to be, but not without an audience.
Yeah, which must have been weird. I think it's also strange because I'm sure for the people who are standing there, because they were also, I think it was just the performers who were allowed to attend, right? So I'm sure everybody's like processing the situation while also trying to support each other, which must have been strange as well.
Totally. There was also a weird intimacy in that, in being together in this weird time where you are in this whole environment that is supposed to host so many people, but then you can talk normally and talk without screaming at each other, like about the work that you're doing and the normal things that you will do in a festival, but then always with this glooming thing on top of your head, like what are we doing right now? Are we supposed to completely change? And as I mentioned before, it's because it was just the day it started, like you mentioned, so all the feelings are like on the air of what to do, what to feel. And I guess for you too, and everyone, I had all these contradictions between, is art what we're supposed to be doing right now, but also we shouldn't be letting it die, like art in terms of practicality, when we need to be more practical about almost everything, and go to basic services. Is this supposed to be happening or not? And or I mean, it's an open question, but I love that we are still trying to keep the audiences engaged and push the limits of our practice. But it's also a really relevant question of where our energy should be put right now.
To continue on with that, like, how do you really think that this whole experience will force you to pivot in the landscape of performance art? And how do you think it'll affect you moving forward?
That day, I remember talking to some people at Culture Hub, and it right now it seems like a really good opportunity for people to experiment on going beyond the chat room. So okay, it's awesome that you're streaming your thing, and it's awesome that you're having virtual concerts, and that's what we know to do. But then for a lot of people, it will be the time to say, what can I do with the tools that we have learned to make use of this space that is entirely new, that live audiences are not one directional in a physical setting. You always have the pairs or the people that are shouting whatever song you want to have. I mean, I'm putting in a context of music, but it's always a reciprocity of what happens with the audience and how that audience influences on the performer. So how to not make that happen in virtual space, because that's pointless, but rather find those channels, those two-way channels on this new space. And I think that hasn't been explored at all before this, even though we had the tools, but maybe it's a chance to do it.
I think it's a really interesting idea. I really love, just to reiterate your point, I really love the recognition that modeling it identically in a virtual space is not the point, that this could be a great time to innovate, because I think one of our habits as technologists is like, how can we capture something identically from the real world and provide it to the online space, instead of looking at online spaces as like additional alternative, or like, an additional canvas to paint in. I wonder, like, if there's anybody who you've seen so far that's been doing this well, or at least exploring in a space that seems different than you might have anticipated.
I've seen a party happening. I don't know if it's still happening, but like every night, a queer New York City party happening on Zoom, which is amazing. And it also gives this sense of intimacy, because you are seeing everyone's room, and I don't know, in their pajamas, some of them chilling, or some of them really putting a show and filling it with light. So that was just raw, you know, like, let's open this and see what happens. And I thought it was amazing. And so far, I haven't, to be honest, I haven't been much online, because at some point I'm trying to take, I don't know how you all feel, but this constant shower of, I'm trying to talk to my friends, I'm trying to be in this thesis meeting or meeting with this and that. And at some point it's like, I need to get physical again and be away, but that I haven't catch that much performances yet. So, but I'm looking forward to see the adjacent plus culture hub call and what that comes of.
Yeah, I think that one thing I'd love to return to just briefly is your sentiment on productivity or focus of energy, because I think that this is, I feel like some people are talking about this, but I think it's a really interesting topic, the idea of whether or not we should be making art right now. Is that what we should be focusing our attention on? Is that something that is like the most like productive use of our time during a crisis? I would love to hear if anybody has any thoughts on that. If you want to drop it into the chat, I would love to hear what you think. But I also would love to recognize that, like, in the history of crisis and pandemics, like, art has really been like the saving grace. You know, that's the thing that's really, I think, afforded people the emotional tenacity to survive. I don't know what you think, Tundi, but I think it's certainly like a form of crisis relief to be able to like express, but also ingest other people's creative work. And I think it's like a funny, I think it's a super interesting conversation to think about it as like, is it a measure of productivity that's utilized, that's worth or warranted of our time at the moment?
Definitely, I think that art has the power to heal. It has the power to comfort people during hard times. I think that art is one of the things that makes people feel like they're together. It creates a space to contemplate new solutions moving forward, and it's very exciting to see what everyone's doing around the effort. You know, so Aaron, I have a question that we're going to be asking each of our hosts, and it's somewhat unique in that everyone has a story to tell in terms of why they are doing what they do, why they're doing the things that they love. Usually it's a very personal journey as to why people do the things that you do. But we would like to ask you and each person who's going to be on our show this question: why is it that you do what you do? And just to give us some personal context.
Wow, that's I'm looking forward to hear what more people say about this. To be honest, my first instinct to answer that question is to tell the story of how I ended up here, but that doesn't necessarily mean a reason, just a logical step by step of how did I ended up here. And I started making music when I was 11 from seeing a guitar on the living room of my grandmother, and I have to fix this. Then I fixed it and I have to play it. And then one thing led to the other, and you start playing in bands. And then it's like, what career path should I choose? If I spend 8 hours a day practicing, then that's the most logical answer. But I guess underlying those logical steps, there is always these pillars of your craft, but also your path in life, that is making things that are, I don't want to sound cliche, but empathy really moves the world towards our place. So music, I think, is like a binary code for the brain, so to speak. Like when talking about, sorry, it's clicking a little bit. When talking about narrative experiences, it sort of always have this filter of rationality, but music seems to either overcome or nor pass through at all that rationality filter. You either like it or not, and then it's really pulling your emotions. So to me, it seems, I don't want to call it a tool, but really powerful energy to move your people, the people that are around you, hopefully to a better state, you know? either if that's through exploration of the limits of the technique or through more direct approach in the lyrics and say like, I want to talk about politics in my lyrics. The vehicle of having catchy tunes behind it, it's always great. But yeah, and overall is more like, on my case, a logical set of steps that ended up made me end up here, but more, rather than oh yeah, that was my plan from the beginning.
Yeah, I just wanted to make note of some of the things that have been said in the chat, because I think they also reflect what we're discussing and what you've said in the past during this conversation. So Jackie writes that we should be questioning the should I be doing X, Y, or Z, which I think is something she's quoting from her therapist, but I also think is like a valuable thing for us all to be probably thinking about. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Aaron, but
yeah,
I'm curious to hear.
Maybe I choose the wrong words, but I don't mean to frame it in terms of productivity, because that's awful. And I think mentioning productivity right now, it's the path of like, let's go back to work regardless of the safety and well-being of everyone. And that's not the word at all. It's more like, time is short and we all know that. And as artists, you know how long it takes to craft something that you are proud of and how hard that process is. So it's, of course, this is going to inspire great art. And I agree with you, Tundi, that, you know, the wars have produced great works of art in the aftermath of that, you know. But it's more about the now, the urgency versus urgency, basically urgency. What are you supposed to, you wake up, and even with thesis and us, like, we're going to land in a recession. And one of the worst recessions, it's, should I be worrying about my references or like job scouting or sending, crafting face masks and sending those to the hospital? Or, so it's more about that juggling in the, it's a crisis. Everything is moving. So I'm not saying like art, it's pointless. It certainly is. And I will be glad that we could be surrounded by all the art possible right now, because mentally it's amazing. And it's amazing that we have this space to talk about it, to vent, and the parties that are happening are amazing. But it's more on how to juggle, how to make the best of our time, because right now it's an emergency. And I bet all of us have really powerful skills to make the best use of that towards making the community survive this in the best way possible.
No, I completely agree with you. And I think that juggling act is something we can only figure out for ourselves, right? So I think that's like a really good point to end on. And Lola in the chat has a sentiment that might be a nice one to close our conversation. Lola writes that she completely agrees with what we're saying, and would also add that the creative force creates a space for a new world to be born. And certainly that world is going to come with all kinds of limitations that are out of our hands. But, you know, there's a lot that's possible as a result of a dismantled system. So I suppose there's like wiggle room in that. And I'm really excited to see what you do next. Thanks for talking to us. Really appreciate you putting aside your time and all of this to chat to us about your experience.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. This is amazing. I'm looking forward to hear the rest of it. I'll keep listening. And I invited a bunch of people. Shout out and huge hello to my mother, which is somewhere there listening.
No, that's so cute. Oh my gosh. Hello, Iran's mom. That's so cute.
Thanks so much, guys.
So we're really lucky enough to begin with an audio mix from our classmate, Adi Dahia. Adi is a light artist, a new media artist, and DJ in New York. And the mix that he has given us is really exciting. It's compiled, it's comprised of a compilation of songs. Each one of these songs was released during COVID-19. On March 20th, Bandcamp made an announcement that they'd be waiving their profit shares from the song, from songs that are posted onto Bandcamp, in order to create more profit going directly into the pocket of artists. So all of the songs in this mix have been pulled from that announcement and the songs that have been released since that announcement. So without further ado, we're going to play Audie's mix, and then we'll resume together to interview our lineup of guests for the rest of the night.
Accommodation's my biggest fault tonight. Presenter drink on table 9. I'm just waiting for her reply. Wow, like, that's like a lot of lines. Wow. Well, good. Bye. Table 3 is acting strange. Yeah, I regret telling him my name. Is he high or just irate? Asking me why it's so hard to date? I'm married, I say. Awkward smile and walk away. Yeah, I saw the ring, he shouts in defense. His vibe now tragically starting to make sense. Just another night in paradise. Another night on the floor, all right. Tonight. 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 Oh, look who it is. Industry guys, sit down, I bet. They'll pretend that we've never met. But I waited on them just last week. He's celiac, likes turkey meat. Room for growth in this world, we say. Then checking out is our walk away. Just another night in paradise. Another night on the floor, all right. Just another night in paradise.
She got control it. That ain't gonna stop me, and I get locked up. Won't let me out. They won't let me out. Locked up. Won't let me out. No, no. They won't let me out. Locked up. Won't let me out. They won't let me out. Locked up. Won't let me out. No, they won't let me out. Heading uptown to Rio, back with a couple P's. Corner blocks on fire, lovers dressed as me. Making so much money, products moving fast. Put away the stash, never sold the last bag. Fucked around and got locked up. Won't let me out. They won't let me out. Locked up. Won't let me out. No, no. Won't let me out. Locked up. Won't let me out. Oh, won't let me out. Locked up. Won't let me out. No, won't let me out. Listen, won't let me out. Your magazine won't let me out. Money on it won't let me out. Oh, baby, won't let me out. Locked up. Won't let me out. Where's my lawyer? Won't let me
Welcome, Matt.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, if you have anything else you want to add in terms of what you're doing right now, feel free to introduce yourself.
Just surviving. Like, I don't know what I'm really doing right now.
We'd love to hear how, this whole COVID situation has adjusted your routine. What are you doing now? What does it look like? What's your schedule like now? Is everything turned upside down?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know, you kind of caught me on a down day, so my answers tonight might be kind of pessimistic. I really don't have any semblance of a schedule. Some days you're just crying a lot. Some days you end up watching a Top Chef marathon. Some days you're really active and trying to connect to people and like try to show up for people. And some days I get work done and realize it's like kind of a way of shutting everything out, and I end up not feeling good about that. I had like a lot of freelance work that got canceled. Like my relationship to teaching has shifted and stuff too. And like I'm kind of dealing with that. Like I this week has been that feeling of like, oh man, once my class is done, like everything's kind of open-ended. And like I don't really know how to make a schedule from that. I'm finding creative outlets and finding times to have like Zoom parties and house parties with friends and play games and have like real conversations. But every day seems like it's responding to different emotional energy, not only of yourself, but the people around you and what they need.
I think you're really right to note that there is something that's stabilizing about the time between now and the end of the semester. And I feel like, to me, I can't even picture post like graduation. Like I have no imagery that comes to mind. It's just like empty. Like I can now see myself each day between then and now, but after that it's like kind of like a wild west kind of situation.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate your honesty about the schedule, because I think the internet is really, filled with people who are managing really well. And I'm not to say that you aren't managing well, but I haven't had many conversations with people who are outwardly saying like, I don't have a schedule, I'm trying to figure it out day by day. So I appreciate that. Sorry.
I was just going to say, we've got people in the chat agreeing. Dawn says true. Aaron says you're the best.
I appreciate that energy. I'm doing good, like I've got a lot of support from amazing people. Something that's come out of all of this is like the relationships I have with people. You know, I've been saying to some people like you, where you hit the fast forward button, some hard conversations, necessary conversations, the way you show up for people and talk about how you view people in your life. Really lucky to receive that energy and like receive that kind of affirmation at times with other folks. So
I think we've all gotten a slightly deeper look into your life, especially recently. With your performance with La Mama and Culture Hub. I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit about this online performance that you did.
So I set up a Twitch channel. I actually, in something that's been kind of fun in some ways. I don't have like an art studio. I do live alone and I have like a studio apartment. In the same way, a lot of people that like with good cooking skills are kind of like, what do I have in my pantry? What can I like whip together? Like from a technology standpoint, I've been kind of like, what's in my closet? What like from old shows I designed, old performances I made. There have been moments where I'm like, I need to order something on Amazon. That's just this one part I need. And I'm like, you know, I've been like on the ITP Discord, maybe asking like if there are other ways of approaching this and stuff, and like trying to find, like, it's kind of nice to have these limitations. But one of the things I found from a show I designed at Gibney back in the fall for Ida Saidiv called Not My Name, the whole end of the show had these 5 or 6 network security cameras that we were toggling between. And I learned a lot about like real-time streaming protocols. And then with my class, live image processing and performance, like we're starting to look into Twitch, which every new media or non-new media class in the world is trying to go after right now. So I wanted to see how people could interact through Twitch with like doing kind of like chat commands. So I set up the 5 cameras in my apartment from all these different angles and labeled them like bed, kitchen, TV, and anyone can go on. It's actually down right now. Like I'm doing some like maintenance and like trying to update some things, but should be back up this evening. But people can just kind of watch me live stream my life, which to be frank is really boring. Like, you know, I might sit in front of a computer for 4 hours, the TV. Sometimes I spill coffee on myself and wonder if anyone saw that. Like, and you know, like it's the weird punctuations that come out that I'm like, but I always, one time I actually have a VR set here and I accidentally like hit my screen and knocked the entire system over. And my first thought was, I wonder if anyone saw that. Culture Hub's really done some incredible stuff. Like they're connected to La Mama Experimental Theater Club. But they do this kind of like more technology approach to performance. And their whole thing is like networked performance. So they were, to say, uniquely equipped for the reality we're all living in right now. And they have a lot of open source tools that they're developing around creating like network performance. And they started hosting something called Downtown Variety, where they're trying to bring people together and have people perform in their living room, but also like asking them to like try some new stuff. Obviously, some people are like singing or playing guitar. I've also seen some puppet shows. So the thing I was trying to figure out, like mine's more of like it's a longer piece. It's just an ongoing piece. So I was kind of resistant to doing a 3 to 5 minute version of it, but I ended up just kind of not doing anything. Partly because I heard you talking about productivity and I was like, I don't know how to be productive. I don't want to dance in front of a camera. So I just kind of did nothing for 3 to 5 minutes. I think I ate a banana and like washed a dish or something. I don't know. I think it was a little bit maybe of like a selfish, frustrated response to like everybody jumping on Instagram to do dances and stuff and share. I love the love and support that's coming out of it too, but sometimes it just doesn't feel disingenuous. It's just like not on the line that I'm on right now.
It's also challenging as you're describing these like waves of feeling different ways. It's like interesting to think about like an intention, setting an intention to like go live. I think it's like the mundane component of it is all we have right now. We're not out in the world and we're not doing the activities that we've usually done to keep our attention and our interest. And so we have to find beauty or curiosity in the mundane components of life at the moment. And I think that when I saw your piece, I think that that was really what spoke to me about it, is that like this is what we have to find interest in at this point.
Something I've been wrestling with the piece that's only kind of like become apparent to me lately, and like one of the reasons this week was kind of like a rough one, was there's some ways in which running that live stream feels like for me a way of not being alone, not being forgotten, not being invisible. There's so many ways through like my identities and my privileges that I'm not forgotten and not invisible, but like I also am scared and I also am like lonely. And there is something about feeling the presence of people watching in a room with me, that I don't know if it alleviates that or it intensifies that, you know, like I'm not always sure it's a good relationship I have with people being in the room watching me, but it doesn't always feel like a bad one either.
And I think that speaks to definitely a lot of us where we feel that way as well. There's something really interesting in you kind of putting on this performance almost in your own home, as if existing is its performance. Somebody put on in the chat that it's like we're actually, our whole life is now become a performance. It's like, are we actually even in reality? I don't know if you mind speaking to this, but a lot of times, at least I know Lady Gaga does this. She says in her house, she's herself, and when she's outside the house, she's putting on this act. You're kind of doing the opposite, and you're bringing now this kind of performance into your own everyday existence. I'd love to hear about like that feeling of now having put on a performance. If you even feel like this is a performance at this point, or if it's just a documentation of this time that you're living in right now.
I mean, it definitely doesn't feel like a performance. Like I kind of realized after a while that like some people think this is like an art project I'm doing, and like it doesn't feel like it. This is not something where I'm going to be like, oh man, at the end of all of this, I'm going to put on my website and have a supercut of like the best moments. Like I'm not actually even recording any of it. There's something about like just letting it be ephemeral that feels really nice for this time, rather than feeling like I need to document it specifically, even though it's like a constant state of documentation. I'm not viewing this as like another art project I'm doing, but in that capacity, I'm not really sure what it is. And I don't think I really do much to shift who I am in my space just because the cameras are there. Like if I need private time, I'll turn the cameras off, or I'll go to the one space like in my apartment, my bathroom, that like gives me some privacy. But otherwise, I've kind of just like let the mundaneness of my life kind of like shine through.
And yeah, it does feel almost to me like a project in connection where other people are not feeling alone.
I've had some nice messages even from people where they're like, I feel less lonely. I just like got you open on like a browser tab, and every once in a while I just look and I see you there, and like it makes me feel like I'm in a room with someone. That's been a really nice sentiment to like receive from people.
I wonder what other things we're doing like subconsciously or actively to initiate feelings of like connectivity. Sometimes I feel like opening a window and listening to people walking by is also like something that feels really, really viscerally human at the moment because everything is so quiet.
I don't know if you've experienced this, but there's an entire world of Zoom parties now, and when people are kind of just spending time together, eating their dinner, whatnot. I'd love to know how you feel like your own practice and performance is going to evolve due to COVID-19, if you think that it will, or if you are just kind of waiting for things to get back together and you'll go about your normal way.
I mean, nothing's gonna get back together. I mean, like obviously like life will go on in some way, but that part of my energy around the negativity of people doing like their dance performances in their living room on Instagram lives, it feels like there's like this kind of clinging to this reality that used to exist that's not going to exist once we come out of this. Not that there won't be dance or whatever, but I mean, and everyone's grieving and going through their own mourning process of like what they've lost personally. I don't even mean like people getting sick, but just jobs and shows and things they were excited for. But I mean, like this has definitely shifted how I think of performance. This week was the first week I've started working on a new thing that's actually related to my class, and I got to like test drive it at a Zoom party last night, related to like using avatars as like performance tools and using avatars as a way of embodying Zoom windows so that people have a sense of presence. And like one thing I'm really curious about is like all of our interactions now are so flattened. We're like used to experiencing on a screen, even this Zoom layout, this grid. When we're in a space with people socially, but also in performance, there's like a dynamicness of three-dimensionality. Like you're over there, I'm over here. You can feel the presence of other people. You know, like I've been on some Zoom parties. Some have been nice. Some have been really unsatisfying. You know, like sometimes you're not sure if you're participating or you're just watching, or doesn't feel like there's the ability to kind of go in and out that you do in like reading social cues and body language. There's no idea of like separate space. Everything's kind of like just right here. So I'm curious about using game engines, using other things to create a sense of embodiment, to create a sense of presence where people feel like they have that three-dimensionality back.
Just wondering, I guess in this whole experience, it sounds like your work certainly in the world before COVID had many ties towards the experience of feeling intimate in a way that was perhaps more heightened than how I guess I'm trying to say that you've been nude on camera before, so we've gotten an intimate connection to you in ways that are different than reality. And I suppose we're just trying to think about for all of our guests today the reasons now why they're doing the work that they do. So the kinds of qualities, whether they be like emotional or otherwise, that are propelling your work forward at the moment, and whether that shifted what it was like before the quarantine.
My work has always kind of been about my body in like a lot of different ways. Like you spoke to, like I've been nude in like some of my pieces and stuff. Almost everything I've made, with the exception of like one major work I have, like involves me or my body or embodiment. I think for me, that's related to sometimes like I'm not like interested in using words to talk about things I feel. Like I want to create like experiences. I want to create complex things involving me to like tackle something that I'm like working through that I can't really put into words. As I've gotten older, I've started to learn, I think, or realize, I think a lot of that's connected to my disability. Like I have hearing loss. I've always struggled with hearing. I've had hearing aids for years. I never really identified as disabled, but I'm starting to question that relationship a lot more and like how I assimilated into hearing communities. And I think that idea of like bodies being broken and malleable and breaking apart is something that's deeply connected to that, even if I didn't know it while I was making that. To go even further with that, with hearing aids I've always looked at my body as being mediated by technology. Like I can't function in I was about to say normative world. I don't know I can't function in like the predominant world or the hearing world specifically without technology filtering that and giving me access to it. So I'm always thinking about how does technology extend the possibilities of the body? How does it like transmute it and break it and like offer new possibilities of existence? And I guess where I'm starting, like I've done a lot of stuff with avatars, but now I'm finding, because we're all kind of stuck in this, like in our spaces, how do we create new spaces and new embodiments? And like, how can I play with like avatar characters and avatar performance as a way of maybe transcending the limitations of my body in this moment?
It sounds like really helpful bases of thought at this moment. We really appreciate all the work that you do, but also really appreciate you taking the time out of your varied schedule to talk to us today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to talk, and I apologize if my energy was a bit downbeat on talking about some of these subjects, but it's nice to
No, you're perfect. It was perfect. It was exactly what we wanted and needed to hear.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really excited about our next group of people. These are all alumni from the ITP community. This project that we're about to talk about was advised by Tom Igoe, Nancy Hechinger, and Dan O'Sullivan, who are names that I'm sure a lot of people on this podcast would recognize. So I'm really excited to introduce Sebastian Morales, Tiriree Kananuruk, Kritchaya Twitchsri-Granati, Regina Cantu De Alba, and this is just like the most exciting collection of human beings that I think we have access to at this moment. So hey everyone, I don't know how many of you, oh there's a few of you, okay great. I'm sorry if I butchered your last name. I tried and practiced on my own, so please feel free to correct me as we go through this call. So this group of alumni that we're about to talk to are really incredible in their response to the COVID-19 crisis. Quite quickly, I don't know about everybody else who's following these things on a day-to-day basis, but this was the first group that I saw who jumped into the role of trying to use their ITP skills to aid the medical industry. So they have a collective, a small group called Makers for MDS. They're a nonprofit collective working together to deliver face shields to healthcare practitioners at the Jacobi Medical Center and Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx. And so I think that the most exciting component to this is like not only just the speed, but of course that these people are utilizing the skill sets that we learned and gained from our master's program to deeply help people in a very rapid way. So thank you so much for joining the call, everybody. Really excited to have you all here. Are you all here? Miss Tiriree, are you here too?
Hi guys.
Yeah. Hey Poi. Hey, welcome. So thanks so much for joining. We just wanted to, of course, take a second to give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves outside of this project. So I don't know if each of you want to just give like a 1 or 2 sentence synopsis of who you are and what you do, and then we can talk about the project that you've like all valiantly gathered together to produce.
Hi, my name is Sebastian Morales. I think all of us are ITP alums. I graduated 2018, and since I've been doing a bunch of things, freelancing, working as an artist, and teaching. Tiriree?
Oh, hi. I'm Tiriree Kananuruk. I'm also graduated the same year as everyone, and mostly I do performance stuff and also teaching and assist Sebastian.
Lola, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Well, the name my parents chose for me is Regina, but everybody in the ITP community knows me as Lola, New York at large, I feel. So I'm Lola. I'm a creative technologist at a tequila company, and I live in Mexico.
And the last person is me. On paper, I'm Kritchaya Twitchsri-Granati, but people call me Poi. That's the Thai nickname, which doesn't have anything to do with the full name, but can call me Poi. And I am a UI UX designer at Estee Lauder. And I'm also doing a paper flowers, which that's the project that I came up with, the 100 days, thanks ITP, and I'm teaching in the classes. Wow.
Yeah, I would just like to know why you guys decided on your project, why face shields. You can give us a little bit of context.
Yeah, so I guess like I can hop off and start with that. So my husband, he's a pulmonologist, so he's a pulmonary critical care doctor at Montefiore Medical Center. So basically that's how we get started. That he basically worked at the ICU and intubating patients. And when this COVID started, we know basically like how to prepare ourselves. And then about the PPE, it's not just about essentially at his hospital, it's lacking everywhere and shortage like all over the world. So when the outbreak starts, I guess the very first conversation is basically like I was talking to Lola and being like, what can we do? Dude, I'm we're frustrating. One day you're happy, one day you're like don't know what to do, and then it's just a personal thing that's scare for him that he's gonna walk into the ICU and not knowing what's going on. Like, of course, he's been telling me that this is my job every day. This is why I sign up for. I'm critical care doctor. So, this is what we came for. But then again, as a wife, also a friend to all those doctors, we're thinking about you guys walking into this literally a war zone, and then it's without a proper protection, what can we do? So I guess it started from that conversation with Lola. We looking at some research of how people doing face shields, and then we're like, oh, okay, this is something that we can do with a laser cutter and 3D printer or anything that we can have. So I guess to start from there, that Lola is you're telling me hey, you should talk to Seb, you should talk to Tiriree, you should talk to me through. So then that's where the conversation starts. As you can see, it's all expand.
That's amazing. So the team really formed via the idea of assessing a need and thinking of who could fit that need in the ITP community.
Yeah, I think Lola, you can go. Sorry.
Well, I think that what is interesting is that Poi and I were having the original conversation because I noticed how people were starting to get frustrated and kind of bored online, because I know that she does, like she said, she does the paper flowers I was like, hey, let's have a conversation, and we can, I can do it in Mexico and I could do it in Spanish for the people down here. And we were talking, and she was just telling me like, oh, Glenn, her husband, he's like MacGyvering these goggles to go into the hospital. And I was like, no, he shouldn't, like we have this huge network of people who can help. So it's funny because it's like I'm remembering all of the other people who have been on already. We're talking about creativity, and we're talking about like, should we be doing it? And I feel that Poi and I wouldn't have had that conversation if we weren't concerned about how to still be creating at this moment,
Right. I really like that you're also seeing this as a form of creativity, even though it's like a really specific build, a really specific need that you're filling. I really like the idea of it still being like something that feels very creative and feels very like innovative in the way that it's being expressed.
Yeah, well, I think that to that Seb and Tiriree can talk about, because it was really Seb who realized, and something that was interesting here is that everything was happening on WhatsApp. We were not together. It's not the normal, you're in the shop, you're like seeing, and just through conversations on WhatsApp, Seb was able to pick up that there was something that was not efficient about the design that we were using. And he was able to come up with an answer for that. So I think that's a very unique thing.
Yeah, because like we like our very first conversation, we are like, okay, like let's see the requirements of like, what are the designs that like they were doing, like using in the hospital, and also not just the design, but like the material. But also there's a conversation between like, okay, so how do we deal with logistics, right? Like Lola was saying that, we can't like go to ITP or like, work at the shop or something like that. Like people has to work in their homes. And also like we have to make sure that everyone are safe, right? And then we got to make sure that you get to do your job, like your day job, like to do that. And then this is like an extra stuff that, yes, if you have time, great, you can join. And then also like the conversation between like, okay, if you like can provide something, but also making sure that the distribution is like making everyone safe, basically. But
yeah, it's difficult with the floor being closed right now, working together, and there's a sense of community even in the whole world right now coming together to basically do something for this cause. I'd love to know, given that IT peers really do seem to be the first ones to kind of jump in and be creating change, if you feel like how the ITP community is influenced by this project, and what do you think that other ITPers are doing, and have you seen other people making things?
The way Tiriree and I got into this was sort of twofold. In parallel, we were already doing some of this research, and then Poi told us about what was happening with Glenn's hospital, and then we realized that this was a perfect avenue. But we had already joined this other Slack group, the different efforts around the world on PPE, because this sort of happens there's like a 2-week delay to different countries, and I see it now because, and Lola, you might see it as well. We're from Mexico, and Mexico is like in a 2-week delay from the US, and then they're just starting to get where we were like 2 weeks ago. But we were in a 2-week delay from many European countries. So there's all these like countries like Italy and France sharing all these things that they're doing and all the projects that they're trying to solve. So us, at least at this tiny apartment in Chinatown, we have like the privilege to have a lot of machines that we normally wouldn't need. But then it's like, what do we do with all of this? Like we have cutters, we have printers. Like we are in a situation where we can help out, and that's how we sort of then found out about Poi and her efforts. And it's like, yeah, this is the perfect. It's something where we can help. Like we have some tools, but we cannot do like mass production. And then in her hospital, I guess her husband's hospital, there's 13 doctors. 13 is a small enough number that we can work with them, so we can just focusing on having what they need, just making sure that we as a small team, we can supply them. And that's sort of our relationship with them. But I think ITP as a greater network is doing incredible efforts. Like I know some people at if you read the alumni list, you can tell that some people at the new lab, they're doing like hundreds of or even thousands of PPE equipment, and then they're going through these certifications, mass production. It's like the efforts are being incredible. It's just very exciting in that sense.
That's really cool. I neither Tundi or I are on the alumni list yet.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll join. Unfortunately, in May when it all comes to an end. But I'm curious about the chain of action. So when you speak to the doctors and they need the mask, like what happens next? If you could like walk us through how the operation works.
Yeah, sure. I think it's worth mentioning another person that I've been talking to almost every night, which is Mithru. We have
he's sick right now, so we couldn't have him today.
Yeah. So yeah, he's basically the one who connected to Tom and then Nancy and Daniel to go into ITP, because that's where we think about we can't find those N95 anywhere. So instead of going to the the shop around our neighborhood, what about ITP shop? And then Mitu was the one who actually went to the ITP, and then also Jesse Simpson went to the ITP shop, and then we got a good amount of the N95, and then get that delivered, and then we distributed that to all the doctors. And then they have each of them has 13 of them, which of course they were using, but that's definitely better than nothing. So with that, I guess it's a lot of back and forth, because now my husband is on typing on site off, which is to get the doctors not to get burned out after a 5 intense days, and then also rotate throughout the program. So I guess with that figured out the capacity of how many of the skills that our team could work, and also how many doctors in the team, right? So it's not just about these 13 doctors, of course thinking about nurses and other healthcare workers at the hospital, but figured out the number and the day, and also delivery, logistics, and then how much money do we need? At first, we're just thinking about okay, whatever we need to buy, just decide right now. And then we want to make sure that the delivery guy and everyone, when we're delivering these parts are safe, and also probably Seb would talk about this before, you come up with this MacGyver stuff, as we already do in ITP. Basically, the wrap is stable with saline wrap, because we want to make sure that each of the parts are sterilized. And then when they get to my apartment, I wipe it off with alcohol again, and get tested with my husband, making sure that all the parts are safe. But generally that's how we be doing it. Right now we kind of on a weekly mark, I check in with Mithu and Lola weekly on Monday to see okay, where we are, and then each of us talk to other members in the team who can there's Tata, there's other more people who's hey, I can sew, I have a sewing machine, hey, I have 3D printing, and I have vinyl cutter. So there's a lot more people, not just ITP, they're really wanted to help, but also there's some article about supplies and materials that we want to make sure that okay, now we have a good chain of people live in Brooklyn, and then go to Chinatown where Step is, and then come to me on the Upper East Side, and then so then I can give the stuff to Glenn, and then up to the Bronx. So but yeah, that's basically what we've been doing.
a very complex network you've all designed in very short order. Like 14 steps for like something you
Yeah.
have to, I'm sure, figure out in a couple of days. It's really impressive.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'd love to also ask if you guys have any other things you want to add about your project. We only have a couple minutes left.
I think that something that I would like to add, and it's very interesting, and I've been thinking a lot about this, is I'm in Mexico. A lot of the reason why I stayed connected with this group and I tried to help with the communication and the financing and the admin side of things to the best of my possibilities is because of the connection that I feel with the community. And it has also informed me, like Seb said, we're 2 weeks delayed in Mexico. So that information, it's been very interesting to see how I have not only information, but knowledge of the situation and how my knowledge has now starting to inform groups that are working here. Things like what Seb was saying, oh, it's better to be tending for a smaller group of doctors than trying to give equipment to all of the hospitals who are COVID, that are COVID. So I think that it's very interesting in terms of network, how information and knowledge can travel and what that really means. And that it's not only data, but it's also the experience of noticing how people are feeling and responding. And I hope that's one of the learnings that we have after this whole thing.
Yeah, you're building a real social intelligence. And I feel like that's like an invaluable part of what we need to come out of this in the most positive way possible, you know. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I wish we had more time to talk to you about this project, but I really encourage anybody that is listening to go to the link posted in the chat and read more about it. And I mean, of course, like you four can always feel free to like hit the list if you need extra support. I'm sure there are lots of people eager to try and like help people directly. We just really appreciate your work and we're glad you exist.
Thank you
for having us.
Yeah, thank
Thanks.
you. No problem.
And for everybody who's listening, that site is makersformds.wixsite.com/donate. Okay, thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Tom Igoe,
Hello.
we are absolutely thrilled to have you on our show. Thank you so much.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so Tom Igoe is a legendary professor of physical computing at ITP at the Tisch School of Arts at NYU. He teaches courses in physical computing and networking, exploring ways to integrate the internet more fully in everyday activity. Tom, I love, you're doing amazing things teaching us remotely. I'm in one of your classes, Light and Interactivity, and during this entire experience with COVID, you have done incredibly fascinating and unique things in terms of getting everybody on board to communicate wirelessly to changing and hacking into the lights at ITP remotely and being able to do live performance there. So we're really fascinated by any kind of opinions you might have on education during this time and hearing your evolution in terms of innovation for teaching us. So love to get started, and if you feel free to introduce yourself if you have anything to add there.
That was a great intro. Thank you. Maybe too much, really. I don't have a whole lot to add. I mean, I've been at ITP for a long time. I came as a student in '95 and sort of forgot to leave. I spent a couple years managing the labs and also freelancing. When I first started as the lab manager, Red said to me, "Oh, by the way, you're going to teach an intro class." And I was like, no, I can't do that. She's like, no, it's going to be fine. You're going to do it. I was like, no, I hate being in front of a room, Red. She's like, no, it's going to be fine. I said, no, really, please, it's a great honor, but no. She said, no, I'm the boss. You're going to do this. So that's how I started teaching. And, like I said, I spent a few years freelancing. And then what I found was every week, the day that I was teaching was the day I looked forward to. So when a full-time position came up in 2000, I applied for it. I've kind of been there ever since.
And I'm sure you were way back then not expecting that you'd have to teach in this manner, because ITP has never taught in this particular way. Or maybe, I don't know the whole history. Maybe there has been a time where we've had to go online. But I think what's really exciting about the last 4 weeks, in amongst, of course, all the recognized chaos, is is the agility that I think a lot of professors have shown, including yourself, to pivot their class to a way that still feels compelling online. When you had to do that, were you following an example that you saw in another academic space, or was this pulling from resources that you found you had already set up for the possibility of teaching remotely, or the possibility of thinking in networked ways off the floor?
Well, I mean, some of it was, we've had our materials online for a long time in terms of class materials on the web, but that's like textbooks, right? I mean, at this point, it replaces textbooks, or it supplements textbooks. But the thing that makes a class is the interaction, is the talking with each other, the coming up with ideas together and all that. And honestly, I don't think any of us had an idea how the hell that was going to work in terms of a class situation. So a lot of that for me was basic improv. It's like, all right, what do I got to do and how am I going to make this happen? And, fortunately, everybody in class is really eager to do stuff and eager to talk about it. And I think if it weren't for that, you wouldn't get classes to work. So everything we've been doing in terms of live class material, I don't think any of that is stuff that we consciously thought about, but it's stuff that's sort of in the air at ITP because we're constantly working with this kind of material, right? Working with chat apps, working with video apps and so forth. As for how we decided to, or how I at least decided to organize things for class, I don't think I had the first clue how it was going to go until that first class. And then I was like, all right, here goes nothing.
And how do you think the last 4 weeks have sort of evolved? Like, what are the tweaks you've had to make between the first session and today?
I haven't had to make a lot of tweaks in class things. I mean, the toughest part is sometimes you can have a time, because everybody's going through different emotions during this time. And there's only a tiny bit of that you can read in an in-class situation, but you can get a lot of it in office hours or in informal meetings. So I think a lot of what's made class even possible to keep going for me is that people are coming to office hours and office hours in quotes. And those one-on-one conversations, whether they are because we're talking about your project or because you're working on a work study thing or just because we happen to be on the same chat on something else, are really critical because it means you've got a sense of how to relate to people in class. And some go okay and some, there are days when everybody's down, but that is kind of the way it goes in my mind anyway.
Got a question here from Razik, and he asks, how have classes that require fabrication and physical labs changed since the quarantine has begun?
Radically. I think, Ben Light, who runs the fabrication area at ITP, has been spending a lot of time finding ways to do things. And one of the first things he did was put together every possible online resource he could. And, as Tundi, as you know, with our class, I put the lights online, so at least we could do that part of it, but that's not really fabrication. I think everybody has lowered their expectations in terms of what they can come up with finish-wise, but from what I've seen in class, nobody has lowered their expectations in terms of what they can come up with design-wise or creatively. I'm still seeing things that are really neat ideas. They're just doing them with whatever materials they've got at home to do them with. And I think, to me, that's one of the most heartening things, is seeing people realize that they can be just as original with, a piece of paper and a beer can as they could with, $30,000 worth of machinery. That said, we have been doing our best to make whatever resources we can available in terms of some of the services and such. I know Ben got a bunch of machines out to his subtraction people because that was the last of the money we were allowed to spend, essentially. And as we start to think about what this would look like long-term, obviously we don't want to be doing it long-term, but one of the things we are thinking, okay, if we had to teach this online, what could we do? And the good thing is there are these services out there that you can use. We've also thought about the idea of, could you take a model like LaGuardia Studios at NYU, where you essentially send your materials and they send back cut pieces, where that's done in-house rather than out of house. It's changing. It's not changing fast enough. One thing that I've been really kind of thrilled and humbled to see is how much the students who are all within geographic proximity of each other are sharing resources. I'll talk to somebody one day who's like, hey, I just got a 3D printer. Okay, great. 5 people are biking stuff over to their house the next day, hopefully all keeping distance. But it does seem like there's an awful lot of that informal community sharing that's going on.
Yeah, I think that's really lovely to see, for sure. And I guess also in the times where that's helped me out with a project, it's just been kind of nice for like some version of being close to my peers.
I'm way far away from a lot of you, so I wish I were
Wow.
closer.
I feel like this is kind of in the same vein as the next question I was going to ask, which is, you know very well that like as an educator, sometimes for the most part, like your content is valuable, but the thing that really drives students to feel passionate about the work that they're doing in that class is the atmosphere that you create as a teacher, the kind of like tone that you set, but also the social design of how you try to create an environment that feels like an exciting place to learn, or even just like that empowers people to use their previous expertise to feel like they're an asset in the room. I'm just wondering what kind of tactics or skills, or I suppose even just like tricks you might have employed, most positive version of tricks, that you might have employed to try and, create a online version of that, because I've taken classes of yours. You're very good at this, creating a particular dynamic in class, and how that's correlating online is very interesting as a person who's taking classes, to see the ways in which teachers are really nailing this or sometimes missing the mark. And I'm just wondering how, like, what are the kinds of things you've done to keep that in mind this quarantine?
Honestly, I wish I were doing it better. I mean, I think the thing I'm trying to do as much as possible is get people talking and get them talking about whatever they're interested in at that moment. Broadening out the assignments so people can do anything vaguely related to the topic as long as they're interested in it. Getting people to jump in and start working together on things. Trying to get people to give each other suggestions. Those are the things that you try to do, and sometimes it goes great and other times not. But I think like I say, I think the key is you've got to meet everybody at their level, both of ability and ambition. This is something that I don't think has changed, and I think hopefully it won't, which is that every successful teacher I've ever met teaches at the level of the students they're aiming at. You don't say everybody must meet X level. You sort of say, this person is capable of A and their ambition is towards B. Let's see how far we can push them towards B. And when they fall, let's catch them. And sometimes you'll see people who are capable of B and they're only going to a little bit above A. And you're like, all right, now you can go a little further with that. I think it's been a lot easier to do that with ITP students because they're already there. I haven't had as many conversations with faculty outside of Tisch about this, other than my wife who's teaching middle school in the other room. But my sense is that if you're trying to do it in such a way that everybody's up to one level, that's got to be a lot harder because everybody's levels are different right now.
So Aaron asks, what are some things that you've discovered could change for the normal class semester after having all this remote experiences, if any?
I'm realizing how much I really, really, really like being in person. I think one of the things that I'm going to try and do more in the future is some of these very quick screencast videos. I normally hate doing videos because it's much easier to do in conversation, but I've had to do some just because there's no way anybody could sit through that stuff in class live, and because stuff won't translate across the video link. So I'm going to try and do more of those in the future so that we can leave more time for, okay, you saw the material. Now let's talk about your questions. Now let's talk about your reactions. That's probably the biggest for me.
And I wonder how that will affect students' agency in the ways that they feel like they are like allowed to contribute, if they're given an opportunity to speak directly to the content, which isn't always available in a classroom. You can't have one-on-one reactions with your students in a classroom. Another question in the chat was from Sebastian. Do you think people might shift their interest away from physical projects after quarantine? If so, how do you think we might bring them back to that?
I don't think they will, honestly. Every single person I've spoken to is just jonesing for a hug right now. And I think that goes for the ability to do things physically, for the aesthetic of tangible things. There are just as many problems with the virtual. Who wants to put on a VR mask right now that somebody wore 2 minutes ago? So there's problems on both sides, but I think at the end of the day, we are animals, and animals have a physical being, and we're not going to lose that. And I think the minute people can be back together, and the minute they have access to resources to do those things, they will do them. I mean, they are doing them now, and I don't think they're going to stop. I think they're just going to be like, yeah, all right, more, let's get back to it.
If anything, certainly I feel like people will have maybe a clear understanding of the specific way to fill a need through like a tangible project. Now having so much like devoid human contact.
Why do you do what you do? What brought you into this world?
That's a
Just
large
really
question,
easy last
Tundi.
question. Yeah, just a chill last question.
The reason I do what I do is because I think that it's very easy for people to feel disempowered by technology. And for me, the thing that keeps me going is when I see somebody come out of our program who's like, no, I can do this and I can help you to do it too, right? I mean, everything we were just talking about a minute ago with Sebastian and Lola and Poi and Mithru, that's the kind of thing that keeps me going, because it's so easy for people to become passive in the face of technology. But I think that if we don't try to be active, if we don't try to be active participants in the progress of it or the lack of progress of it, then we're kind of screwing up. So to me, that's the number one reason I do what I do.
I really like that answer because it also speaks to accessibility in so many ways as well. Like we're really privileged to be connected to the floor, but it's also so refreshing to see ITPers step off the floor to help other people. I think that's the point in a way.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I in the course of those first few days, I had a couple meetings that almost made me cry. One of them obviously was with Lola and Sebastian and Boy and them, and not even meeting, just text chains. The other was, I got on a 100-person meeting with everybody on the Arduino team, like 2 or 3 days after it started. And I was worried that they were going to be just like devastated because they're all in Italy or Sweden. And they were like, nope, we got this together. We're already working on this stuff. We're yards ahead of you and we can tell you what's coming in 2 weeks. And I was like,
wow,
that made me so happy.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. But we really appreciate talking to you, and also just like, your general enthusiasm for innovative ways of interacting with each other. It's just really like, a nice stabilizing voice in this kind of like messy seas. So really appreciate you, Tom.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to see you again. And Tundi, I'll see you on Wednesday. And Ashley, you know where to find me. Good to see you all, and take care.
Thank you so much.